Imagine you're a Luftwaffe ace, 37 confirmed kills to your name, sitting in your Messerschmitt at 28,000 feet over occupied France, spring of 1943. You spot something absurd climbing toward you, a massive American fighter that looks like someone strapped wings to a water heater. Your wingman laughs over the radio, flying milk bottle, he calls it. You both dive to attack, confident this will be kill number 38. 30 seconds later, your canopy explodes in a hailstorm of 50 caliber rounds. Your instrument panel disintegrates. Your wingman's aircraft is already tumbling toward the earth, trailing black smoke. You barely make it back to base, hands shaking, asking yourself one question: what in God's name just happened? That question haunted the Luftwaffe for the rest of the war. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat in April 1943 as a joke. German pilots genuinely mocked it. They had every reason to. At 7 tons fully loaded, it was the heaviest single-engine fighter ever built up to that point. The British Spitfire weighed less than half that. When American pilots first climbed into the cockpit, they couldn't believe the size. Robert Johnson, who would become one of America's top aces, later admitted his first thought was, "I'm supposed to dogfight in this thing?" The Germans thought the same thing. But here's what nobody understood in those early months. The P-47 wasn't designed to dance. It was designed to dominate through sheer, overwhelming violence. And the mechanism of that violence was something the world had never seen concentrated in a single aircraft. 8 Browning M2 machine guns, all 50 caliber, all synchronized, all firing simultaneously. Let me put that in perspective for you. Each gun fired 800 rounds per minute. That's 6,400 rounds combined. The P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of ammunition, enough for about 30 seconds of continuous fire. But 30 seconds was an eternity in aerial combat. Most firing passes lasted 2 or 3 seconds. In that brief window, the Thunderbolt could send 320 to 480 half-inch bullets screaming downrange at 2,900 feet per second. German pilots called it a wall of lead. That's not poetry, that's physics. Here's what that wall could do. Declassified combat reports from the 56th Fighter Group describe a P-47 attacking a Focke-Wulf 190 over Germany in August 1943. The American pilot fired a 3-second burst from 300 yards. Witnesses reported the FW-190's wing simply separated from the fuselage. Not damaged, separated. The entire wing. The German pilot didn't even have time to bail out. But the mockery didn't stop immediately. It took time for the Luftwaffe to realize what they were facing. In those first weeks, German aces still believed they had the advantage. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 were faster on the deck, more nimble in turns, battle-tested over 4 years of war. Experienced German pilots had tactics refined through combat against British Spitfires and Soviet Yaks. They knew how to exploit weaknesses. They assumed the P-47 would have plenty. The breakthrough moment came at altitude. The Thunderbolt's secret weapon wasn't visible from the outside. Deep in the aircraft's belly sat a massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine, generating 2,000 horsepower. Connected to that engine was something called a turbo supercharger, a turbine that used exhaust gases to force more air into the engine at high altitude. This wasn't new technology, but the P-47 system was different. It was optimized for extreme altitude performance. At 30,000 feet, where the air is thin and oxygen scarce, German fighters gasped. Their engines lost power, their controls became sluggish. But the P-47, the Thunderbolt, actually got stronger as it climbed. At 30,000 feet, it could still produce full combat power. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most decorated fighter races, later wrote in his memoirs that encountering Thunderbolts at high altitude was like fighting while half asleep. They had energy we simply could not match. Energy, that's the word that changed everything. Modern fighter pilots talk about energy fighting, using speed and altitude as weapons. The P-47 pioneered this concept out of necessity. It couldn't outturn a 109 or an FW-190 in a traditional dogfight, so American pilots developed a new tactic: boom and zoom. Dive from superior altitude at tremendous speed, fire those 8 guns in a devastating pass, and then use that speed to climb back up before the enemy could react. The P-47 could dive at over 500 miles per hour and still pull out safely. German fighters that tried to follow often broke apart from the structural stress. Johnson proved this on June 26, 1943. Johnson was escorting bombers over France when a Focke-Wulf 190 bounced him from above. What followed was one of the most documented cases of aircraft durability in military history. The German pilot hit the P-47 with cannon and machine gun fire. Johnson counted the hits later, over 200 bullet and cannon holes. His windscreen shattered, his radio was destroyed, hydraulic fluid covered the cockpit, the tail section looked like Swiss cheese, but the aircraft kept flying. Johnson nursed it across the English Channel and belly landed at his base in England. The German pilot had emptied his ammunition into the Thunderbolt and failed to bring it down. That's when the psychological shift began. German pilots started filing reports describing the P-47 as unusually resistant to damage. That's military language for terrifying. Luftwaffe intelligence officers analyzed recovered wreckage and were shocked at what they found. The aircraft structure used massive forgings and thick armor plate. The pilot sat behind a huge slab of bulletproof glass and steel armor that could stop 20mm cannon shells. The engine's 18 cylinders were arranged in 2 rows. If half the cylinders were destroyed, the other half could still generate enough power to get home. By late 1943, the mockery had completely stopped. In its place came something else: fear. German pilots developed what they called Jabo fever, Jabo being short for Jagdbomber, fighter bomber. When Thunderbolts appeared, Luftwaffe pilots knew what was coming. If they engaged at altitude, the P-47s would use energy tactics to dictate the fight. If they stayed low, the Thunderbolts would dive down with such speed and firepower that evasion became nearly impossible. The sound of those 8 guns firing became distinctive. Pilots described it as tearing canvas, an industrial roar that announced destruction. Then came the paddle blade propeller in 1944. Early P-47s used standard propellers that limited their low-altitude performance, but engineers developed a new blade design with wider tips that bit deeper into the air. When the first paddle blade Thunderbolts arrived in Europe, German pilots thought a new aircraft type had entered service. The performance improvement was that dramatic. Climb rate increased by nearly 50%. Low-altitude speed jumped. Suddenly, the P-47 could chase down German fighters even near the ground. The Luftwaffe's tactical options evaporated. But aerial combat was only half the story. The P-47's true devastation came at ground level. Those 8 machine guns that could destroy aircraft could also obliterate locomotives, trucks, fuel depots, and troop columns. American pilots discovered that dive bombing with a P-47 was safer than using dedicated bombers. The aircraft could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs, deliver them with surprising accuracy, then strafe the target with machine gun fire, then climb back to altitude faster than German anti-aircraft guns could track. The numbers tell the story. In aerial combat, P-47s destroyed 3,752 German aircraft. Impressive, but not unprecedented. The ground attack figures are staggering. 86,000 railway cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives wrecked, 68,000 trucks eliminated. The German war machine literally ran out of transportation. Oil couldn't reach refineries, ammunition couldn't reach the front, troops couldn't redeploy. The Thunderbolt didn't just win air superiority, it strangled an entire nation's logistics network. German generals began calling it America's economic weapon. They were right. The United States produced 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts between 1942 and 1945. That's more than twice the total production of all British fighter types combined. Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale, New York, was churning out these 7-ton fighters faster than Germany could train replacement pilots. American industrial capacity had transformed into aerial supremacy. By 1945, Luftwaffe pilots who had laughed at the flying milk bottle in 1943 were desperately avoiding combat. Their memoirs and post-war interviews reveal a consistent theme: respect mixed with trauma. They'd learned that engaging a P-47 Thunderbolt was a coin flip at best, and those odds only existed if you saw it coming. Here's what stayed with me while researching this story. The P-47 succeeded not through elegance or innovation alone, but through brutal pragmatism. It was too heavy, too big, too expensive by traditional standards, but it worked. Because American engineers asked a different question. Not how do we build a better dogfighter, but how do we build something that survives and kills in the worst conditions imaginable? The answer was armor, firepower, and an engine that wouldn't quit. The mockery lasted 3 months, the dominance lasted 2 years. And somewhere over Germany in 1945, the last Luftwaffe ace who'd laughed at that first Thunderbolt was probably hiding in a cloud, hoping those 8 guns would fly past without noticing him. That's not just history, that's the moment ridicule transformed into survival instinct, one bullet at a time.